Hey guys, so I'm jumping in here to give you a quick Bill Cosby update. As some of you may or may not have heard, after 2 years, Bill Cosby has finally scored a victory, in that he is now able to fight and appeal his 2018 sexual assault conviction before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Will it be successful? Well, we don't know, because nothing has really made sense thus far. But this is still a big win, and it's potentially very huge. Let me explain why. Doesn't matter what people think of Bill Cosby, doesn't matter if you like him, doesn't matter if you hate him, doesn't matter if you think he's guilty, doesn't matter if you think he's innocent. The fact remains. No matter what anybody thinks, Bill Cosby was undoubtedly given an unfair trial. His trial and conviction was horrible. Now let's fall back on the media-molded opinions from celebrity agents, media talking heads, and all those documentaries and things like that, because I think we've had enough of that. And let's just talk factually and reasonably about the actual case, the facts and the evidence over here in reality. He was convicted in 2018, even though Andrea Constand did not have a solid case at all, and it took 2 attempts to do it. So what exactly happened? Let's refresh. Andrea Constand, the woman that put him away, always had a very bad problem with inconsistencies. Her story was not credible. Even the very last time she was on national television, she was deceptive. Deceptive, not by flat out lying, but by omission. She went on live TV and only spoke about herself drinking water, but according to the transcripts, she was drinking red wine. And the journalist sitting in front of her presumably did not know this and didn't ask.
Swallow.
And he hands me some water. I get some water somehow, and I swallow the 3 pills down.
Why do you do that?
I took them because I trusted that they would maybe just help me feel a little more relaxed.
You trusted him?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Now, why is this important and evidence of deception? Let me explain. It shouldn't have been a big deal either way, but to omit this information is a big deal. Now, this is speculative and somewhat theoretical, but when someone's telling the truth, they just tell the story as it happened. But when you leave important details out, it's as though you're trying to protect an image or a narrative. With Constand, it may be the image of innocence and victimhood. When you admit that you went over there and you were drinking wine with them, some people might say, hey, that's interesting. These types of selective omissions are indicative of protecting the story by not having to explain too much. It preserves the innocence and image of her being lured in and preyed upon, rather than the truth, which was that she was someone that was hanging out with him, drinking wine at night. If she told the truth that she was having glasses of wine with him, the line of questioning could go in a direction she's not comfortable with. And these little things and omissions and inconsistencies are some of what the first DA knew from jump. He knew she would never survive a legitimate cross-examination. Inconsistencies, backpedaling, changing details, and problems with her stories all around. Anyway, so she told America the story that she drove over to Bill Cosby's house at night, suddenly felt ill, took random pills Bill Cosby handed her, and she didn't know what it was, only drank water, then fell out and got assaulted, but wasn't raped. He didn't finish the job, just digital penetration. That's the story. And some of the details that a lot of these celebrities that like to talk about this subject left out, and the media talking heads that spoke about this left out, is that the 2 of them made out before on a few different occasions. Another huge omission from the story that hardly anyone knows. So that night wasn't their first encounter. So one of the big problems with Constand is that she never really had a strong case. Through the years, she's given lots of inconsistent information, inconsistent statements, and there were a lot of things that could be perceived as deception and something not right with her. So she couldn't really do this alone. 9.9 times out of 10, he would be acquitted. And if we're going to be very honest, this case was not won on its own merit based on evidence. This case was successful largely due to outside variables. like the very powerful momentum of the metoo movement at the time, the very anti-Cosby media, and because of the many decisions made by the judge and the DA in this case. And this is precisely the reason Bill Cosby has a strong case for appeal. In order to bolster her case, the judge allowed 5 additional accusers to enter her trial. This was obviously more prejudicial than probative. These cases did not have due process, these women did not have any evidence, and they were working together behind the scenes with the infamous Gloria Allred. So for many good reasons, this should never have been admitted, but it still influenced the jury. Not because of the validity of the claims, but the mere spectacle alone. And that is one of the many unconstitutional and controversial decisions that Judge Stephen T. O'Neill and DA Kevin Steele pulled in this trial. That should not have happened. The truth is that those women didn't have any more credibility than Andrea Constant. It was just the Me Too dogpile tactic that I spoke about in other videos. They all had inconsistencies, so they were not legit prior bad acts. I mean, one of them was even Janice Dickinson. And she even admitted to making things up to sell books, including things she said about Bill Cosby. Another was a woman who admitted Bill Cosby never gave her any drugs. She took them herself. Another was a woman with no evidence but a long rap sheet of lies, false reporting, prostitution. And this is what was brought in to seal the deal. None of the quote-unquote prior bad acts were strong. They were all suspect. Then they believed the women and then put Bill Cosby in jail. So for those out there who still don't understand what really happened, this is why Bill Cosby is now allowed to appeal his kangaroo court conviction. And all of this is what the appellate court judges now have to take a look at. Leave the opinions, the emotion, the ideology to the side. According to the number of things wrong, Bill Cosby's case is one of the most corrupt cases in U.S. history. That is no exaggeration. It's just that nobody cared because everyone was completely brainwashed by the media and convinced of his guilt. Even when people sized up his accusers one by one and said, well, all right, maybe not that one. Then they'd probably just say things like, well, he raped somebody. Come on, all those women can't be lying. Yeah, we're going to have to retire that statement too. When I broke all of this down to friends and some people around me, some are so programmed that nothing will ever convert them. But that's true about this and lots of other topics. Some people just get their information from television and popular opinion. We live in a very socially engineered, programmed society, and I'd imagine the vast majority of people very lazily just assume the things I'm telling you right now are wrong. He's guilty because he's guilty, and the herd cannot process any information to the contrary. It is what it is, nothing we can do about that. But then there are those friends and people who are a little more open and awake and agree with a lot of my commentary on a lot of things. But there's those one or two things that, they're gonna pass. The Bill Cosby thing was one of them. Until some of them try to go rounds with me. Because here's how things usually work. People with closed minds are just gonna argue to argue and defend their position or their ideology. Especially true of a lot of the feminists I debated with. Some people are already emotionally committed to the narrative they want to believe. So they won't allow new information to get in, even if it checks out. So a good question is, how is that not me? Easy. I can explain my position according to the facts. Ideologues usually can't. And then some get frustrated because of the emotional aspect. When we are supposed to be proving someone's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, well, I'm making all my points supported by the facts. When the counter argument is, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. Look at all those women. He admitted it. No, he didn't admit it. Media kind of implied that, but no, it's in the deposition. There was no real admission. What he did admit to was giving them out and partying with girls back in the day, as many people and celebrities did. back then. Crazy time, but no, he didn't admit to drugging them so that he can rape them. So when I say things like Andrea Constant, Chloe Goins, and many other accusers gave multiple wrong times and dates for their stories, or how come in the span of 40 years no one reported it or got a toxicology report, so none of them have any proof? How is Constant a legitimate victim when she's been calling him repeatedly after the alleged incident, asking for tickets to his shows, and even called him up for Valentine's Day? So with all these legitimate questions, proof beyond a reasonable doubt is already up in flames. And if someone is countering these questions with just more hypotheticals, statistics of other victims, and metoo inspired feminist talking points about why women don't come forward, and just more of the aforementioned fluff from media, then that would mean being a typical irrational ideologue. And it would be flawed reasoning and wrong. Ideologues protect the ideology, and they fall short of logic and reason. It means committing to the belief that all the Cosby accusers are all telling the truth and insisting that they are victims, even though this is a celebrity case with huge financial motive and victim status has not been made clear by any of the evidence. In fact, there is a lot more evidence to the contrary, but for the more open-minded folks. Eventually, they'll start to hear themselves arguing and notice that the facts aren't on their side. They're regurgitating things they've heard, things said by celebrities, things said by media. But he admitted it, and all those women came forward. How many women does it take to be believed? And all that kind of stuff. But not any facts. And so, lots of obstinate people did come around, and their jaws dropped after finally realizing and accepting all the things they did not know. Now, let's talk about some of those things and why Bill Cosby always had a shot to fight this thing. Because if I sat people down individually and explained to them one by one what really went down, their minds would be blown. But in order to appeal a case, it has to be strategic. You can't throw everything and the kitchen sink at the appellate judges. You have to choose which things to go after and strategize a plan of attack. The law is a lot like a game. This case was so unfair and so unconstitutional that Bill Cosby's defense had a lot of cards to play. So let's just talk about some of them. For starters, Kevin Steele, the DA, ran on the campaign promise to get Bill Cosby. You can't do that. You literally cannot do that. You cannot run for public office promising to jail a citizen who at the time had not been convicted of anything. Against the rules. We have the right to fair trials. You can't just decide someone's guilty, run for public office to get the guy who didn't have a fair trial yet, and then proceed to reel him in. But the media had successfully lobotomized most of society at this point, with Bill Cosby guilt. No trial, no evidence, no proof, just trial by media. That's why everything Kevin Steele has done from this point onward was strange, obsessive, overzealous, and unconstitutional. He never even began his position on a good foundation. He was hunting Bill Cosby to fulfill his campaign promise. That's why Steele ran into the game and committed flagrant foul number 2. He unconstitutionally reopened a dropped and settled case. The case with Andrea Constant. Now, this deal wasn't even about guilt or innocence. This was about everyone going on with their lives. As previously mentioned, Constant had lots of problems with her story. So the previous DA, Bruce Castor, could not put her train wreck of a case through his court. So, to serve both sides and wash his hands, he made a deal with Bill Cosby. If you agree to this deposition and settle out with her, you will never be criminally prosecuted. Full stop. And Bill Cosby agreed. And he agreed not necessarily because of guilt. He was a rich man that was paying to move on with his life. He had things to do. But as soon as Steele got in office, he reneged on the deal and charged Bill Cosby for the case the former DA promised never to prosecute him on. Was that even legal? No. Cosby's deal with the former DA should have been a binding agreement. He fulfilled his end. He paid the settlement and agreed to the deposition. And it was all done under the condition he would not be prosecuted. Steele just kind of made up some loopholes and justifications, and he just pursued it anyway, and nobody stopped him. So he took a dropped case and threw it into court, where he would team up with his accomplice, Judge Stephen T. O'Neill. More flagrant fouls. One of the problems with O'Neill that I've mentioned many times in many videos, his wife is a psychotherapist and sexual assault counselor. And his Me Too wife was running around publicly talking about believe the women, believe the women. So Bill Cosby's defense rightfully objected and said, hey, this man's wife is publicly telling everyone to believe the women while this case is on. He may be compromised and he needs to recuse himself. There's an irony when it comes to people like this because many are very well-intentioned, but also potentially extremely dangerous at the same time. Because here's the very delicate situation. People who work with the sexually assaulted or those who were sexually assaulted themselves often identify with the accuser. So more likely than not, they will lean toward believing the women. Unfortunately, including cases where they might be lying or where there's red flags of deception amiss, because many are emotionally attached to the scenario and the ideology. The judge's wife, Deborah O'Neill, with her degrees in psychology, should know this to be related to behaviorism and the psychology of association. That is why the compromised need to be kept away from trials. And when the judge's wife was publicly making statements like a sexual assault activist, it is a red flag and he should have been pulled from the case. But motion denied. He stayed on. And so Judge Stephen T. O'Neill blocked some of Cosby's witnesses, including Marguerite Jackson, who was going to testify against Constant, a former roommate who heard her talking about her plot. So he blocked her, but in the second trial, he allowed 5 extra women for Constant, none of whom had evidence or a consistent story. So believe women, just not any women Cosby's defense brings. Yep, at any rate, the first trial failed. The trial was going in one of 2 directions: hung jury or an acquittal for Mr. Cosby. But the good Judge Stephen T. O'Neill didn't want any of that. So after repeatedly ordering the jury back to deliberation, he maneuvered it into a mistrial. This way they can try him again without it being double jeopardy. And that's exactly what they did. Kevin Steele dragged Bill Cosby to court again. Second trial. One of the members of the jury blurted out, "We all know he's guilty, so we can all go home." They heard it, and Cosby's defense team made noise about that because it should have been an immediate mistrial. Surprise, surprise, Judge Stephen T. O'Neill did not grant the mistrial. What he did was allow the 5 additional women to pile on into this case. The 5 accusers were horrendous. If you haven't seen some of my other videos, I go over each of them. I'm not going to do it over and over again in every video because it's not necessary. 2 of them blurted something out in the courtroom like actresses in a TV drama. It was so fake, so put on, and the fix was in with this kangaroo court. There was something so bad in the air, and there was a carnival-like atmosphere outside. This wasn't about justice. This was so made for TV and wrong. The fix was in, and he was convicted. Perhaps the most egregious flagrant foul. This case was not proven beyond a reasonable doubt. That was impossible before this thing even began. The main accuser has multiple inconsistencies, so how were you ever supposed to have a guilty verdict when it was impossible to begin with? So even though it could be argued in bars that these women were not truthful and all of this could have been financially motivated, well, all of that is irrelevant in court at this point for the appeal. The law works a certain way, and even though there's so many flagrant fouls and things wrong with this case, the defense is allowed to go after just a couple of things. The legality of this case. Kevin Steele should not have put this case through in the first place because of Bill Cosby's deal with the previous DA. He made up his own rules, sidestepped the Constitution, and set a very bad precedent with this. I mean, even the settlement alone, she signed an agreement and took money, and the terms of the settlement is that she doesn't go forward. So how did... You know what? Never mind. Thinking about all the things in this case after a while sometimes hurts the head. The other thing they're going after is Judge O'Neill's decision to bring in 5 prior bad acts. All 5 cases were not given due process. Very, very dangerous precedent set here. It's wrong. So basically it's just he say, she say stuff. It should have never been admitted. It's not prior bad acts. It's garbage, and it was an unfair pile-on. So the defense lawyers are going to present these things before the appellate judges. Now, during the height of the Me Too hysteria, nobody wanted to hear anything. Bill Cosby was guilty because he was guilty. Nobody wanted to see any evidence or hear anything else. But now that it's subsided just a little bit, quite a few people are starting to scratch their heads and realizing there may have been a grave mistake. Some channels that have a respect for what I do wonder why I cover this topic so much, and I kind of wonder why they don't. I still don't think people understand how important this case is. This has become so much bigger than the people involved at this point. Here's something that I will never forget. One day a few years ago, I was debating a feminist lawyer. Nothing official, just at a get-together with friends. And it was cordial, for the most part. But people eventually parted the ways after a while because it was clear that we were polar opposites on this subject. So we went rounds back and forth, and it's not a competition. But she was getting obliterated and a little frustrated because she was clearly losing the argument, but while believing that she was right. But I'm cool and I'm calm and I'm nice and very rarely aggressive with people. But I did not let her get away with all that fluff, and I'm a tough debater. But a lot of people started to listen to the two of us go back and forth, and she got destroyed. Because she was doing what a lot of people do. She was an ideologue. She wasn't being reasonable, and she didn't know anything. Like so many people who just believe this story, they don't know anything. They don't know the names of his accusers, or their allegations, or any of the details. She did not know about all the inconsistencies, the shady criminal pasts of some of the accusers, the very organized financial motive, as a lot of them lined up for payments from AIG. All of that stuff, she didn't really know anything, and she got trounced. But again, it's not a competition. It was a conversation, and I hoped that it was purposeful. But what she said afterwards was even more disturbing. She started to ask, well, why am I doing this? And I didn't know what she meant at first until she explained. Oh, you're so smart and you have a channel. Why are you taking this position? And why do you care so much about Bill Cosby when the greater good is that women get to be heard and momentum is being gained for victims? That's when I realized how dangerous these zealots and ideologues are. Because yes, I care about victims, but real victims. And the normal human reaction should have been, wow, oh my God, maybe there's a lot I don't know about this thing. Maybe I'll look into this and get back to you. But no, instead, it was, why are you taking this position? So I knew this was dangerous and there was work to do. Some of us need to get out of our groups and teams and cliques and realize there's a spiritual element to these things. Some things are about right and wrong. And it is bigger than this case. This case puts so many different things on display, indirectly and poetically. This is a precedent being set here. This is America on display.
I stand here in the spirit of Martin Luther King. Reason this is a victory not just for Andrea Constant, whom I consider to be the Joan of Arc in the war on rape.
This is corruption in the court system, manifested in such a high-profile case. This is corruption in media and the power that it has to mislead when the people are not awake enough to hold it to standards. And it has society on display. This case shows us that people will believe anything that they're told, even as the facts say something else. And people will fall for the agendas as they come at us left and right. So yes, this needs to be fought. And this topic is no less than any other. People are still learning that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So I know a lot of people thought in 2018 justice was served. But no, this thing isn't quite over. Not yet.